Our story today is a story of mystery. Human beings are naturally fascinated by mysteries, by everything they don't know directly. It's something a bit introspective, something that has been part of human nature since the dawn of time. Since he was terrified, but at the same time also fascinated by the dark, which is the first great mystery, the light that rises with the sun and then, as it sets, the darkness. Who knows what lies behind it, people always say. Well, many situations, many associations, many human institutions throughout history have left behind an aura of mystery. Because it's not easy. They are not easy to understand. Because you can't always find out more about them. Because sometimes this aura of mystery sparks controversy, or even worse, gives rise to theories about their behavior. We talked last month, thanks also to the suggestion of one of our followers about the Bilderberg group. Today we're talking about the P2, about its origins. More precisely, its historical origins of the P2, because about Licio Gelli, to whom we've already dedicated a video, almost everything is already known. The various events in which the P2 was involved from the mid-1970s onward have been discussed over and over, but often people don't understand or prefer not to talk about the origins of the P2. And people think that the P2 was born directly as something corrupt, as something deviant, as something rotten, and that it was created exclusively to divert Italian democracy from its path. But was it really like that? Was the P2 really born that way? Was the P2 really born with Licio Gelli, or according to some, with other figures like Andreotti or Eugenio Schaefus? Today, let's try to understand more about it, diving into a world of secrets and mysteries. Propaganda 2. But why the 2? What does Propaganda 2 mean? And why did it go from P2 to P3, P4? The great Corrado Guzzanti, with a flash of absolute genius, with his character of the Freemason, hooded, speaking Neapolitan, at a certain point performed a Q1 saying, the P doesn't represent us. What comes after PQ? Well, let's say QQ1 Guzzanti's satire is sharp, and I've always appreciated it a lot, by the way. But why PP2 then? Was there ever a PP1 before? Maybe we're getting a bit confused, so let's start from the beginning and see what existed before P2, if there was anything before P2. So let's see, let's start from P2. There was simply a lodge called Masonic Propaganda. It was a Masonic lodge, secret, reserved, a lodge created within the first Italian Masonic body, that of the Grand Orient of Italy, which still exists today, and which was established in the second half of the 19th century for prominent personalities. Now, we are used to thinking about everyday life, that is, about easy communication. There is the internet. There are smartphones, there are computers. In the 19th century, they saw none of this. There wasn't even the telephone at that time. Not only that, travel. Today, it's easy to book a high-speed train or a plane, go to the station or the airport, and within a couple of hours at most, you're at your destination. In the second half of the 19th century, when railways were still being developed and high-speed trains couldn't even be imagined, let alone airplanes. Airplanes would come even later. Communication and transportation were, I wouldn't say they were pioneering, but almost. For this reason, after the unification of Italy, with the capture of Rome on September 20th, 1870, the various national institutions also began to concentrate in the new capital, a capital that had moved from the original Turin to Florence, causing, among other things, various controversies at the time for political and other reasons, and later from Florence to Rome. And when the entire government apparatus moved to Rome, meaning those ministries, the organizations, also the armed forces, even the Freemasonry of the Risorgimento, which had made a major contribution to the unification of Italy, had found itself right in Rome. Italian Freemasonry had gone through a very long journey, which began in the 18th century, from the first lodges, all of English origin. Then, with the arrival of the French, of Napoleon, the first Grand Orient had been created, the first obedience, the first Italian Masonic body, and later, after the period of the Restoration, a phase also dominated by repression, especially carried out by the Austrians and the papacy. Freemasonry had returned in a new form, with a new association and with new people. The Freemasons, who had contributed with their ideas and also with their actions to national unity. I think it's quite redundant to recall the names of the Italian Freemasons who contributed to the Risorgimento, but you can find the lists almost everywhere from Giuseppe Garibaldi on down. Well, as we were saying, in 1870, Rome was conquered by the Italian state and became its capital. The period of the Roman question began, but that's another topic. And the government, the ministries, the government organizations, the armed forces all moved to Rome, and with them, Freemasonry also arrived. Not that Freemasonry didn't already exist in Rome, even if it was evading the papal police. The Freemasons were already present, but it's the Masonic leadership that arrives in Rome. Here the first problem arises, as we said, in the late 19th century. Telecommunications still don't exist, the infrastructure. The means of transportation are what they are. The journeys are very long. So the deputies, the senators, the ministerial employees, the clerks, the high-ranking officers who work in the ministries, and not only there, and who at home in their residences used to attend Masonic lodges, now find themselves having to deal with quite a problem. Today, imagine a ministerial employee who hasn't moved to Rome, who still doesn't feel the need to live in the capital on a daily basis, can still go back home. Once the work is done, at least for the weekend, people use many transportation options. Back then, as we've said, it was different. Consider the Masons, who generally meet at least monthly, sometimes even more often. But how do Masons who work in Rome, in the ministry, in the office, manage to get home quickly to attend a Masonic meeting and then return? In the second half of the 19th century, it's difficult. It's almost impossible. For this reason, in 1877, the Grand Orient of Italy began to consider creating a new lodge in Rome, a lodge that grew out of one man's idea. His name was Giuseppe Mazzoni, originally from Prato, Tuscan, a Federalist, a follower of Mazzini. Even though Mazzini himself had previously been rumored to have been affiliated, Mazzoni was appointed just before national unification on September 7th, 1870, that is 2 weeks before Porta Pia, to become Grand Master of the Grand Orient of Italy. He is the one who raises the issue: how to organize Masonic activity in Rome among ministry employees, ministers, undersecretaries, generals, admirals, all those prominent figures who are, among other things, public figures and therefore would not want their membership to be openly displayed within the capital without forcing them to go back and forth from their homes or other workplaces for Masonic matters. Mazzoni begins to draw up a list, the list, we could say, of the VIPs of Freemasonry at the time. And who is on this list? There are many. There are, as we said, ministers, undersecretaries. There will also be some writers. Think of Giosuè Carducci. Little by little, this list becomes the idea of a new lodge, a secret lodge, meaning a private lodge, inside which you cannot enter without a specific invitation. And it is always led by the current Grand Master, who also serves as the Worshipful Master. This is how Masonic propaganda is born, a name that is chosen precisely from that list, drawn up by Giuseppe Mazzoni, a list that begins to include some rather important names. We mentioned Carducci, but there is also Agostino Bertani, there is Francesco Crispi, a government figure, there is Menotti Garibaldi, there is Muscatello, there is Ernesto Nathan, future mayor of Rome and also future Grand Master. There is Aurelio Saffi. There is Giuseppe Zanardelli, the first father of school reform in Italy. These are names of a certain stature. Masonic propaganda therefore becomes the flagship of Italian Freemasonry, especially during the Risorgimento. It is the lodge where the elite of Freemasonry itself gather. Certainly not they, on an esoteric level, but the elite on a practical, everyday, administrative, and state level. It is also a training lodge because within the Masonic propaganda several future Grand Masters emerge. Ettore Ferrari, the creator of the monument to Giordano Bruno, which still stands today in Campo dei Fiori. We have already mentioned Ernesto Nathan, and there will also be another figure we have already come across, Alberto Beneduce, the father of the IRI. These are important personalities, and I want to emphasize that in the meantime, within the Masonic propaganda of this secret lodge, they meet, discuss, and grow esoterically, maturing until they become positions recognized within Freemasonry, an image taken, and this
Tutto questo prosegue fino
to the soul's nothing of.
al novembre del 1920.
Thank you. When a law number 2029 of November 26, 1925, decided by Mussolini, dissolves the lodges, or rather makes them illegal. The law is criticized in Parliament by someone who could easily be defined as one of the various enemies of Freemasonry, Gramsci, the communist deputy, who has no sympathy for Freemasonry. In fact, he has always seen Freemasonry, as he himself says, as the cross-party group of the Italian bourgeoisie, defends it for a reason. He says that Mussolini's act of wanting to ban Freemasonry is the first act of a true dictatorship. Because after all, Freemasonry is also an example of pluralism of ideas. Inside the Masonic lodges, you find liberals, monarchists, Republicans, centrist personalities, people from the left. Not the communists, they prefer not to join, but the socialists do. You can find them. This shows how Freemasonry is, as Gramsci himself said, a sort of cross-party organization. Outlawing it is the prelude to dictatorship, and in fact, that's what will happen. Shortly after, in response to the law of November 26, 1925, the Grand Master of the Grand Orient of Italy, Domizio Torrigiani, who will soon be arrested and sent into internal exile, signs a decree. The decree to dissolve all lodges operating on Italian territory. In reality, it is not a definitive dissolution. Many Freemasons prefer to go abroad and recreate abroad a Grand Orient in exile. Others, however, remain in Italy and operate clandestinely. They meet in the evenings, defy the fascist spies, defy the police. They risk being arrested and sent into internal exile. The history of Italian Freemasonry from the 1930s onward will intertwine with that of the anti-fascists, who will oppose the regime both at home and abroad. Just look at how many of the exiles, many of the anti-fascists, were ultimately Freemasons. Some names: the Rosselli brothers, Durati, Amendola, Guido Bergamo. Very important names, some of whom we will see again during the resistance period, while others will be killed abroad by fascist assassins. The wartime period ended in 1945 with the liberation of Italy and the re-establishment of Italian Freemasonry, which went through a very complex phase. Freemasonry had already fractured well before the First World War through a split in 1908, which led to the birth of the current most serene Grand Lodge of Italy. Of the ancient free and accepted Masons, the Alum. This fracture had also deepened during the fascist period, because while Torrigiani had ended up in internal exile, where he was also beaten so badly that he lost his eyesight and died after being released. His colleague from the Grand Lodge of Italy, Raoul Palermi, had not been touched, perhaps because he had symbolically offered the title of honorary Grand Master to Mussolini himself. But let's go back to 1945. The moment when Italian Freemasonry, with great difficulty, tries to reorganize itself. The Freemasons who survived the conflict, survived the War of Liberation, survived the persecutions, the deportations, try to reorganize, to find each other again, to get the old lodges back on their feet. The documents are not easy to recover. Many documents have been lost forever, but those who manage to prove the existence of a lodge asked to be included in one of the two obediences. Obediences that, helped by the Americans, who played a central role in the liberation struggle, they take on a new form, starting with the numbering. That's exactly right. Until 1925, the Italian lodges had a name, but not a number, a distinctive number. From 1945 onwards, the Italian Masonic institutions began to number their lodges. The number assigned based on the age of the lodge itself and the geographical layout of the country. So it starts from the west, or from Piedmont, which was somewhat the cradle of Italian Freemasonry. The mother lodge, Ausonia, was founded in Turin, and from there it continues. Number 2 is assigned to the Propaganda Masonic Lodge, which has just been reestablished, but it's empty. There's no one there. It's recreated, but it's just an empty box, a container, still to be filled. And for at least 15 or 20 years, it stays that way. Or rather, it becomes a sort of temporary holding place for Freemasons looking for a lodge. I'll give you some examples. Within Italy, there are places where some Freemasons write in isolation to the secretariats in Rome asking to resume their activities, identifying themselves as Freemasons. However, it happens that in their place of residence, and I remind you, in 1945, Italy was devastated. In the following years, however, the infrastructure is still difficult to rebuild. Air travel is still for, I wouldn't say the rich, but almost. The railways are not like they are today. As we were saying, it's a bit difficult to travel in a simpler, faster way. So what happens? Some Freemasons who can't find a place in the area, because maybe only the last 2 or 3 are left in a city, and there aren't enough, not a sufficient number to create or recreate a lodge. These Freemasons are registered on the Propaganda Lodge's roll, which serves as a temporary holding area, a clearinghouse, while waiting to complete the reorganization. For the first 15 to 20 years, the Propaganda Lodge, now designated as number 2 and informally called Propaganda 2, or P2, does only this. It's a list where names are added and removed from time to time. Nothing more. The activity is basically zero. And you might say, what's wrong with that? Absolutely nothing. Imagine a large association like a union or a political party. They're all unincorporated associations under Italian law that, not being able to set up a specific section in a certain city, decides to include members who can't find a place, in fact, in a section within a national list. That's exactly what happens with the P2 in that post-war period. Everything changes, as we know. When at the end of the 1960s he arrives, Licio Gelli, the mattress maker from Pistoia, as he was called because for a certain period he worked at Permaflex as a sales director. Gelli is a very borderline character. Gelli is a borderline character. He worked in Spain during the Civil War alongside the fascists. Then he supported the fascists themselves during the fascist era and during the war. Towards the end of the war, he joined the partisan resistance. He also took part in a sensational escape from the Vils Bertoli prison. So Gelli would have changed everything because he would have first convinced Giordano Gambarini and then Lino Salvini to reorganize the P2 as the flagship of Italian Freemasonry. Once again, by bringing in prominent figures, important personalities, big names who, however, needed adequate cover, greater secrecy. Even if the purpose could have been legitimate or in some ways noble, well, the development was completely different. And we saw it once full authority was obtained what could be called carte blanche, or specifically the blank membership cards. Gelli did whatever he wanted. He transformed propaganda, the old Propaganda Lodge, now numbered 2, known informally to everyone as P2, into a personal tool, a tool into which people converged without any control from higher authorities. Many people who, more often than not, had nothing to do with it. It's not. Philosophical, moral, or esoteric research was typical of the Freemasons, of the Risorgimento Freemasons, of the Freemasons who were inspired by ancient traditions. From that moment on, the P2 became something different, something sick, something rotten, something that tried to radically change this country. In a sneaky way, something that led to the compiling of dossiers, blackmail, banking scandals, to violent deaths, And we had confirmation of this just a few months ago, with a final verdict even regarding the planning and financing of the Bologna massacre. It had become a different P2, something else entirely, very far from the original intentions, very far from the ideas of Giuseppe Mazzoni, from those of Ettore Ferrari, Ernesto Nathan, Crispi, Carducci, Costanzo, Zanardelli, and Aurelio Saffi. All very different, all worse. And maybe that's exactly where, from that umpteenth scandal, once the existence of the P2 was discovered, once the rot underneath was revealed, maybe it was from there that a new beginning took shape in Italy, one regarding all of Freemasonry. But let me say, having studied the subject, as they say, it's not right to lump everything together. You can't call all Freemasons P2 members, and you can't even think that all of Freemasonry is the P2. The problem is always the same. Just like the entire Catholic Church can't be summed up by the various scandals, by Marcinkus or by pedophile priests or by WikiLeaks and VatiLeaks, well, not all of Freemasonry can be summed up by the P2. Let's always try to keep things well separated. Let's always try to dig deep, to really understand history, to understand where there have been turning points, and to distinguish the tracks, the right ones, the ones on which the trains of humanity and progress still run today, from the dead-end tracks that have only led to the denial of progress and of humanity itself, and even an attempt to go back to darker times. Let's never forget history is always the continuous progress of humankind, or at least that's how it should be. But if we encounter situations that are dark, obscure, and above all wrong, we must not make the mistake, to quote another proverb, of throwing the baby out with the bathwater.